I waited 20 years for my kids to come back. 20 years of calls, gifts, messages, and tears, but they never answered. So one day, I stopped waiting, changed my name, and became someone they could never find. I remember the first year after they walked away. I kept staring at the phone every night, whispering, maybe tonight, maybe they will remember me this time. But the nights only grew longer and the silence louder. My mind replayed old memories like a cruel movie loop. Why did they hate me? What did I do wrong? The house felt emptier with each season. The walls seemed to echo their laughter, just to mock me. I would sit by the window watching cars drive past. Every time headlights slowed, I held my breath, thinking maybe they were coming back. But they never did. The road outside knew more about coming back than my own children did. I left voicemails pleading for a reply. I sent birthday cards that returned unopened. I nailed letters that came back stamped address refused. I wondered if they changed their numbers, or if they simply blocked me. I wondered which hurt worse, being forgotten or being erased on purpose. People told me, give it time. They will come around. But what if time is the enemy, not the healer? What if time was proof they never intended to return? What if I was the only one still hoping? I tried to keep busy. I baked their favorite cookies, waiting for the day I could surprise them. I folded old clothes, imagining they would walk in shouting, "Mom, what did you cook today?" But those cookies hardened, untouched, and the clothes stayed folded like relics in a museum of ghosts. I even practiced what I would say if they called. "Hi, sweetheart, I missed you." Or maybe, "How are you? Tell me everything." I rehearsed conversations with shadows, but shadows do not answer back. I learned that fast. The neighbors avoided asking about them. Maybe they knew. Maybe gossip reached them faster than truth. People looked at me with pity, sometimes with suspicion, as if I must have done something unforgivable to deserve this silence. Maybe I did, I thought. Maybe I failed without knowing how. Nights were the worst. The clock ticking sounded like footsteps leaving. I could not stop hearing that last slam of the door the day they walked away. It was their decision. I replayed it again and again, wondering what I could have said differently. But regret never rewinds anything. It only sharpens the edges. I spent money on therapists who told me to focus on myself, but how do you focus on yourself when pieces of you are walking around in the world pretending you never existed? How do you heal when the ones you love most act like you died years ago? I tried calling again. 1 year after long silence, the number rang, and then that cold, robotic voice, "Leave your message at the tone." So I did. I always did. I spoke like they were listening, even if they deleted my voice without hearing a word. Maybe my words never reached them. Maybe they did. Maybe they laughed. I did not know which hurt more. Every holiday, I set the table for 3 plates as if suddenly they would appear. I sat in front of empty chairs, whispering prayers I no longer believed in. Hope became a ritual, a quiet self-torture that I could not stop. And then something inside me began to break, slowly at first, like hairline fractures. Then cracks turned into gaps where faith used to live. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a stranger, a waiting woman, a forgotten mother, a ghost in her own home. One morning, after yet another birthday that went unanswered, I stood in the kitchen, staring at my reflection in the kettle, and whispered, "Enough." I do not know why that word felt different, but it did. It echoed through me like a thunderstorm ripping through old silences. Enough of calling, enough of begging, enough of trying to be remembered by those who chose to forget. It was time to bury the old me. So I walked into town, entered a small office filled with dull chairs and paperwork, and I changed my name. Yes, just like that. A stranger, signing away everything she once was.
The clerk asked, "Are you sure?" I whispered, "Yes." But inside I was screaming, "No, please, someone stop me." But no one did. No one ever did. The world did not care what name I wore, and neither did my kids, so why keep holding on to it? Walking out of that office felt like walking out of my old life. I expected to feel free. Instead, I felt numb, like I had cut out my own heartbeat to survive. I went home, packed the last photo of us together, flipped it face down, and sat there for hours, tears running, but no sobs left. I left that house days later, sold the furniture, donated the clothes, and walked away with one suitcase. No forwarding address, no trace for them to follow. Part of me hoped they would look for me someday, but a louder part whispered, "Why would they? They already deleted you." I boarded a bus to nowhere in particular, sat by the window watching everything fade behind me, and for the first time in 20 years, I did not look back, waiting for someone to run after me. No one did. And that was the final proof I needed. That was the day I died to the name they once knew. But I never imagined that one day they would return, searching for me by the name that no longer existed, and I would watch them from beside them as a stranger who refused to speak. The bus ride felt endless, the landscape rolling past without meaning, towns blurring, fields fading. I pressed my forehead to the glass, trying to remember the last time anyone said my name with love. Maybe it was years earlier, maybe it never happened. Maybe I imagined all the warmth I thought I had once. I arrived in a small coastal town, its air salty, its streets quiet. Nobody knew me. Nobody cared who I used to be. That anonymity was both a comfort and a knife. I found a small room above a bakery, cheap, forgotten by time. The walls smelled of bread and loneliness. I unpacked slowly, each item a reminder of who I was trying to not be anymore. The first night, I lay awake listening to distant waves crashing. They sounded like all the unanswered calls pounding on a shore that would never reply. I wondered if my kids even knew where I had gone, if they noticed my house was empty, or if my number was lost in their phones. I doubted it, harshly. Days crawled by. I took small jobs, cleaning, serving, wiping tables in cafes. No one looked twice at me. I was invisible in the best and worst way. Every evening, I walked the beach, watching families hold hands, children running, sand flying, their laughter cutting through me like I deserved that pain. I kept walking until my legs burned because movement hurt less than memory. Sometimes I caught myself imagining my kids as adults. Were they married? Did they have children? Did they tell their kids their grandmother was dead? I laughed bitterly at the thought. Maybe I was dead to them. Maybe long before I changed my name. Maybe the funeral was the day they walked away and never returned. I met people who spoke casually about their mothers, buying presents, calling on weekends, hugging in photographs. Their words felt foreign, like a language I was never taught. I nodded and smiled, but inside I screamed, "You do not know how lucky you are. You do not know what silence tastes like." At night, I opened a small notebook and wrote thoughts I could never say out loud. What if they regret leaving? What if they needed me once and could not find me? What if they come back? I wrote and crossed it out. Sometimes writing helps. Sometimes it burns deeper. A year passed before I fully accepted that my children were not coming. The aches settled like dust on old furniture, and no amount of wiping seemed to clear it. People told me healing takes time, But they did not know time is not medicine. Time is salt rubbed into old wounds until nothing is left but a hard scar. One day while cleaning tables, a small girl tugged my apron. She had bright eyes and asked, "Are you a grandma?" The question struck like lightning. I froze. My voice cracked as I said no. No one ever called me that. She smiled and skipped away, leaving me trembling. Something broke open inside me that afternoon. I cried in the storage room, unable to stop. After that day, I started watching elderly women in the town. They held babies, kissed foreheads, smiled with pride. I envied them so fiercely it frightened me. I wondered what choices they made differently, what mistakes I made that pushed my kids away. Was I too strict? Too soft? Not enough? Or was it simply that some hearts do not return no matter how much you bleed for them? Years folded into each other quietly, until the past felt like a dream I once dreamt badly. My name was different, my hair grayed a little, my reflection changed, but the ache still lived beneath my ribs like a stubborn tenant. I learned to walk with it, carry it, feed it silence. Then, 10 years after I disappeared, the bakery owner asked me to help sort mail. Packages piled high, and among them, I saw a letter addressed to a name that used to be mine. My old name, the one I buried. Chills crawled over my skin. I stared at it, unable to breathe. I nearly dropped it. She looked at me confused. "Do you know them?" I shook my head too fast. She shrugged and tossed it aside. That envelope haunted me, its edges frayed, its handwriting familiar. My heart raced. What if it was them? What if after all this time they finally searched for me? My legs weakened. That night was sleepless, waves knocking outside matching the pounding inside me. I almost went back for it, but fear won. Fear of hoping again, fear of breaking again. The next morning, the envelope was gone. Maybe returned, maybe redirected, maybe thrown away. I told myself, good riddance. But my chest tightened bitterly. I walked the beach repeating, "You made your choice. You are someone else now. You asked to be forgotten." But repetition does not erase desire. 5 more years trickled by quietly. I became older, softer, harder, all at once. The bakery closed. I found work in a library, stacking books. The silence suited me. Pages rustling felt kinder than voices. I lived simply, ate little, spoke little, existed quietly. Sometimes that quiet felt like peace. Sometimes like burial. Then, one afternoon, a pair of tourists walked in, young, anxious-looking, asking about missing person records. They described a woman, mother, left without a trace. Their voices quivered. They spoke my old name. My knees buckled. I hid behind a shelf, breath held, mind spinning. The librarian called the clerk. They kept asking, "Have you seen her? Does she live here? Does she work here?" Their desperation gnawed at me. I waited, trembling until they left. I sat on the floor, shaken. It hurt in ways I thought impossible after so long. They were searching for me, for the ghost of me. But I was right beside them, anonymous, unseen, unheard. I whispered to the empty aisle, "You are too late. You should have called 20 years ago. You should have cared before I vanished." That night I stared at myself in the mirror, white strands framing hollow eyes. I whispered, "Who am I now? The woman you abandoned, or the stranger you will not recognize?" I felt something shift, a strange power, perhaps the kind built from surviving heartbreak. Maybe I was finally someone who owed them nothing. And yet another year passed before the final encounter, when everything cracked open again, because one day one of my children walked into the library not knowing who I was, not knowing I was breathing the same air, watching them ask, "Where do we find records for missing people?" And I stood there, silent, pulse roaring. I wondered, should I reveal myself, or should I let the woman they knew remain dead? I chose silence, and in that moment I realized this was not revenge. This was the ending I built. Piece by piece, a life without being needed by those who hurt me most. And yet I could not have predicted what my child would say next, words that would almost undo everything I had become and make me question if walking away truly saved me or destroyed me all over again.
I watched from behind the stacks as my child scanned the shelves, fingers trembling as if they could sense my presence, but could not name it. Their voice was quiet, soft, searching. They asked the librarian about missing persons files, and I felt my chest tighten like it might shatter. The years of silence settled around me thick and suffocating. I wanted to step forward, but a strange force rooted me to the floor. For a moment, I wondered if they would recognize me, even if I spoke my old name. It had been 20 years. Names change, faces age, memories fade. What would 20 years of absence make me to them? A stranger? A ghost? A mistake they had forgotten to mourn? I remembered the day they left, the slam of the door, the anger in their eyes like I had done something unforgivable. I had pleaded, begged, whispered promises they did not hear. I had imagined apologies returned. I had imagined love restored, but nothing came. Just silence, deeper than any wound I had known. Their hair had grown long or short, depending on what they chose. In my memory, they were still small and trusting, hands once clinging to mine, now restless, shaking, searching. They did not know who I was, and yet I knew every tremor, every hesitation that ran through them. It was mine. It had been mine once. I wanted to call their name, just once, to hear it spoken back with recognition, but I stayed silent, watching them move as if I were a shadow of a past life, invisible and untouchable. The ache in my chest flared with longing and fury all at once. How could someone forget you so completely and still walk around breathing, pretending the world was ordinary? I thought of the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, questioning myself, asking what went wrong. What moment had shattered the love they once claimed to have? What lie had replaced the truth I had lived 20 years waiting and no one came? And now here they were, searching blindly for a mother who no longer existed. I saw the hesitation in their hands when they picked up the folder. I saw the hope flicker in their eyes and the doubt that followed. They did not know that the person they sought had sat beside them for years, unnoticed, sometimes existing quietly in the corners of their imagined world, sometimes hiding from the grief they refused to feel. And yet, the sight of them stirred something I had buried deep within. Anger and love intermingled so fiercely, it almost made me speak my old name, but I stopped, my throat tight. I remembered the pain, the longing, the emptiness, and the betrayal of waiting so long and being left behind. So I stayed silent, letting the years of absence protect me from being broken again. The librarian asked them politely, "Do you want me to check other records?" Their voice kind and curious. I felt a pang of irony. 20 years ago, someone might have asked me the same thing, and I would have answered heartbroken, hoping they cared. Now they cared too late. The timing of life is cruel and precise. I moved quietly among the shelves, my footsteps soft, my hands brushing spines of books and folders, pretending I was another patron. The floorboards creaked under my weight, and my pulse thundered in my ears. They glanced briefly in my direction, as if sensing something familiar yet not recognizing the stranger standing there. I swallowed hard, fear and hope battling inside me. And yet part of me, a smaller part, I thought dead, a tiny flicker of the old love, ached seeing them searching helplessly, the same way I had once waited helplessly 20 years ago. And it almost made me reach out, almost made me cry out, "Mother, here I am." But I did not. I had learned survival comes in silence and walking away. They left the folder on a table, their shoulders hunched, their head down, a gesture so familiar, so human, it almost made me remember everything at once. The days when they clung to me and the nights they forgot me, the life we once had, the life I no longer had.
It all rushed back with a weight that made my knees weak and my chest ache like a wound reopened. I took a step back, my shadow merging with the shelves. I watched them leave the library, their hand brushing the door handle, slowly, hesitating a moment longer than necessary, maybe sensing the presence of the person they sought but unable to find it. I held my breath, waiting for the impossible miracle that did not come. Walking home that evening, I kept replaying every word I had never spoken, every memory I had never shared, every tear I had shed for them in silence, every hope that had been broken over and over in the cold, cruel reality of absence. I realized I was no longer the woman they remembered or the woman they had left. I had been reborn in pain and quiet and anonymity. I poured a cup of tea, staring out the window at the empty street, and wondered if this was the real justice, the true reckoning, that sometimes survival alone is the only revenge we need to claim our hearts back, our lives back. The people who abandon us are ghosts themselves, even if they do not know it. Night fell, heavy and still. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the strange twist of fate that brought them searching for me into my presence, yet left me untouched by recognition. I whispered into the dark, "You chose this silence, now live with it." 20 years of absence is a teacher of a cruel but necessary lesson. I realized then that life had given me something more valuable than reunion, the power to witness their search without being found, to be present and invisible, to understand finally that love is not always returned, and sometimes the only answer is to protect the heart that remains and let the rest fade like smoke. And as I drifted toward sleep that night, the moonlight spilling across my worn floorboards, I felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that the mother they looked for no longer existed, and the woman I had become would never again be subjected to the cruelty of being forgotten again, ever again. Morning light crept through the curtains, casting long shadows across my empty apartment. I sipped my coffee slowly, the steam rising like the ghosts of the past 20 years. I felt them everywhere, in the creases of the walls, in the hum of the radiator, in the soft creak of the floorboards, each sound a reminder of what I had lost and what I had chosen to leave behind. I walked through the town streets, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery mingling with the crisp air, the shops opening one by one and people greeting each other warmly. I smiled politely, pretending to belong to this world, when in truth I was always just passing through, a shadow of a life I might have had if they had remembered me, if they had chosen differently. Sometimes I caught glimpses of families in parks, parents holding children, tiny hands wrapped around fingers that once held mine. I swallowed a lump in my throat, imagining my own children, running, laughing across the grass, unaware that the woman they once called mother had existed in silence, just streets away, watching their happiness and mourning my own. At the library, I arranged books carefully, trying to ignore the memory of the day they had searched the records, my fingers brushing spines. I felt the ghost of their hands on mine, years ago, the phantom touch of what once was, and I closed my eyes, feeling both pain and an odd surge of power because I was here and they had not found me yet. I thought about writing a letter, letting them know who I was. Maybe just a few sentences tucked in an envelope addressed to a name that was no longer mine. Would they open it? Would they recognize the voice behind the words? I shook my head. Even the idea was dangerous. Even the hope of recognition could break me again. Week later, I walked by a small park and a woman called my name. I froze, my heart pounding. She sounded familiar, a voice from the past echoing through the hollow chambers of memory. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning faces, until I saw a child holding her hand, and then I knew it was them, my child. Their expression wary, searching, uncertain, and I felt a wave of something I could not name hit me. I did not step forward. I watched them from a distance, letting my body remain hidden, letting the years of absence speak for themselves, letting the silence do the work that my words could no longer do. I wondered what they would feel if they knew I was right there, if they could see that the mother they had forgotten was alive and had chosen to leave. They sat on the bench, their small voices asking questions, the woman answering patiently, the way mothers always answer children when they are too young to know the weight of the world. I recognized patterns, gestures I had taught them years ago, and it was like a cruel mirror reflecting what they had lost and what I had survived. I remembered nights lying awake imagining this moment and hoping against hope that it would never come, because I knew that seeing them again would unravel the careful life I had built. I had walked 20 years in silence to protect my heart, and yet here they were, 20 years later, in the flesh, searching for someone they thought was gone, and I was powerless to stop the flood of memories. I walked along the path, keeping a careful distance, heart hammering, each step heavy with the realization that I was no longer theirs, and yet part of me always would be. I wondered if they would recognize the stranger I had become, if they would feel the weight of my absence in their bones, if they would understand the consequences of their choices. Evening fell golden and soft as I watched them disappear into the streets, leaving the park empty, their laughter fading into memory. I stood alone, my chest tight yet oddly light. The paradox of surviving abandonment is knowing you can endure everything and still feel the sting of love that was once yours and now belongs to someone else. I went home and opened my notebook, writing quickly, trying to capture the cascade of feelings, the ache and the triumph, the sorrow and the satisfaction of knowing I had outlived their forgetting. I wrote until my hand ached, until the ink bled onto the paper like tears that could not fall. I realized that the years of silence had taught me something no reunion ever could, that strength is found in absence, that peace can be built on distance, that sometimes the only way to protect your heart is to disappear completely and live as if the people you loved most had never existed. And yet that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the moonlight spilling across my floorboards, I allowed myself a small fantasy of what might have been. A brief imagining of them recognizing me, calling my name, feeling the weight of 20 years of absence, and finally understanding the depth of my endurance. It was sweet and painful all at once, and I smiled quietly to myself. I began to dream of a life where I walked among them unseen but always present, where I could witness their joys and their mistakes without being drawn back into the pain of being remembered too late. A life where I was both mother and stranger, protector and observer, a quiet power born from the choice to leave. The next morning I woke early and walked to the beach, the waves lapping gently at my feet, the horizon stretching endlessly. I breathed in deeply the salt and wind, the freedom and solitude, and I realized that I had become untouchable, not because I was cruel, but because I had learned that some love can never be demanded, that some bonds can only be honored through absence. A year passed in quiet routines. I became part of the town, yet separate, always watching, feeling the pulse of life around me without needing to be part of it. I watched other children grow and learn and felt both pride and pain, as if each small life was a reflection of my own lost years. The ache never left, but it became a companion rather than a wound.
Then, one day, a letter arrived at the library addressed to my old name. My pulse jumped, my hands shook. I stared at it as if it were fire. I did not open it. I let it sit on my desk, the weight of recognition heavier than curiosity. I realized that even now, I could choose not to be found, to maintain the life I had painstakingly built in silence. I poured myself a cup of tea and stared out the window at the street below, at families walking and children laughing. And I smiled softly, because I had survived. I had endured the unthinkable, and I had emerged as someone stronger, wiser, untouchable, and free. The past could knock at my door, but it would not enter unless I allowed it. Night fell slowly, and I lay awake, the envelope unopened on my desk, the moonlight soft and forgiving. I whispered to the dark that I had changed my name, I had left my past behind, and I would never come back. I felt the truth of those words deep in my bones, and I knew that even if they searched the world, they would never find the mother who had waited 20 years and finally chose herself. Months passed, and I settled deeper into the quiet life I had built, anonymity wrapping around me like a protective cloak. Each morning, walking past the bakery, inhaling the warmth of fresh bread, and each evening, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon, I became part of the world, but not of it, invisible and untouchable. The years of absence had taught me that freedom is found in being unseen. Sometimes I saw glimpses of families in the streets, parents holding hands with children, and I felt that old ache flicker in my chest, but it no longer controlled me. I had learned to carry it like a shadow, a quiet reminder of what was lost and what I had survived. The past no longer demanded my tears, it only demanded remembrance, and I gave it silently. The envelope still sat unopened on my desk at the library, a relic of a world I had left behind. I would glance at it and feel the tremor of curiosity mixed with fear. Curiosity that maybe, after all these years, they had realized their mistake. Fear that opening it could undo the careful life I had built. The tension between longing and self-preservation was a constant companion. One rainy afternoon, I walked along the pier, watching waves crash against the worn boards, the sound rhythmic, hypnotic. I imagined them walking along this same pier 20 years ago, imagining me 20 years ago, imagining them. I felt a strange connection stretching across decades, an invisible thread that tied us together, even as absence tore us apart. I remembered birthdays alone, the empty chairs, the gifts that vanished into nothingness, the calls unanswered, the nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had failed them or if they had simply chosen to forget me. I wondered if they had thought of me at all, or if my name had disappeared completely from their minds, like a footnote erased from memory. Yet now, as I watched the rain fall in silver threads across the water, I realized I had survived the impossible, the endurance of heartbreak, the torment of being forgotten. For decades, I had learned the cruelest lessons of love and loss, and I had emerged as stronger, sharper, quieter than I had ever imagined. I was alive in ways they could never understand. That evening at the library, a young woman approached me. She had the same searching look I had seen years ago in my child. She asked me about missing persons records, her voice trembling slightly. I felt my pulse quicken. I froze for a long moment, the past pressing into the present. But I did not move. I did not answer. I let the silence speak for me. I remembered every pleading call I ever made, every gift that went unopened, every tear that fell in private rooms, every birthday candles blown out in solitude. The history of absence was alive inside me, and I could feel it teaching me that sometimes survival means standing aside and letting the world search for the mother who would not return. The next morning, I walked past the park where families gathered, children laughing, voices carried in the crisp air, and I felt the old longing rise, only to be tempered by a quiet satisfaction. I had chosen myself. I had chosen a life where my heart was mine to guard, and they could search endlessly and find nothing. I had protected myself in ways they could never undo. Weeks later, the library received another letter. My old name again, written in handwriting I remembered from years ago. My hands trembled as I held it. I thought of opening it briefly, but the knowledge that I was now someone else, someone untouchable, held me back. I let it rest on my desk, the weight of absence more powerful than the lure of recognition. I began writing again in my notebook, the quiet rituals of memory and reflection filling the spaces between solitude and survival. I wrote of them, of what might have been, of the ache that never left entirely, but had softened the sharp edges of pain into wisdom. I had endured the unthinkable and emerged someone stronger, someone free, someone who owed nothing to the past. Then, one crisp autumn evening, I walked through the market, the golden light falling across the stalls. I saw a familiar face, a child,
My child, grown older, searching the crowds, uncertain, hesitant. My chest tightened like a drumbeat of memory. I stopped my steps and watched their movements, careful, deliberate. They did not know I was near, yet every gesture tugged at the heart I thought I had buried. I remembered the first day they had left, the slam of the door echoing through my house, the long nights of waiting, the unanswered calls, the gifts that vanished, the empty chairs at birthdays and holidays, all the small cruelties of absence that had defined my life for 20 years. And yet here they were, searching blindly for me, for someone who no longer existed. I followed them at a distance, heart hammering, mind spinning, my footsteps quiet like whispers blending into the noise of the market. I wanted to reach out, to feel the warmth of what was once ours, to speak a single word, their name, my name, a recognition of lost time. But I stayed hidden. The years had taught me the cost of hope too late, the danger of love given to those who would not cherish it. Night fell, and I returned home, the city lights flickering through the window, casting shadows across my walls. I poured tea and stared at the envelope still unopened, and I realized that the greatest power I had gained in all these years was the ability to remain unseen, to protect myself from further heartbreak, and to understand that love sometimes demands disappearance rather than reunion. The rain came again that night, tapping gently against the window pane, the sound comforting like a lullaby for a life rebuilt. I thought of them, searching in vain for a mother who had waited 20 years and finally chosen herself. And I felt a bittersweet satisfaction, the justice of survival, the quiet vengeance of choosing life on my own terms. I wrote until my hand ached, the ink bleeding across the pages like the tears I no longer shed, writing my story in fragments, memories flowing into one another, the ache and the triumph, the sorrow and the satisfaction, the notebook a witness to the woman I had become, a chronicle of endurance no one could erase. And as I drifted to sleep that night, I whispered to the dark that I was no longer the woman they sought, that the mother who had waited 20 years was dead and gone, and that the woman I had become would never again be subject to the cruelty of being forgotten. The years had taught me strength and freedom, and I held both tightly in my chest. The days blurred into each other, the quiet routine of my life folding around me like a protective cocoon. I walked through the streets unnoticed and unbothered, yet the memory of them lingered like a shadow at the edge of my vision. I could see glimpses of what had been and what could have been, and it twisted something inside me, a mixture of longing and triumph that I could not name. I remembered the nights I spent staring at the ceiling, replaying their faces in my mind, every small smile, every moment of abandonment, every whispered prayer that went unanswered. I had imagined what it would feel like to see them again, to hear them call my name after decades of silence. But now I knew that fantasy could never be realized without destroying the life I had fought so hard to build.
The library had become my sanctuary, a place where silence was sacred and the world could not intrude. I moved among the shelves, brushing my fingers along spines of books, lost in the weight of knowledge, yet haunted by memories. The air smelled of paper and dust and something else, something like freedom. I inhaled it deeply and allowed myself to breathe. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, painting the streets in gold, I saw them again, a figure searching for the missing, a folder clutched tightly in their hands, eyes scanning every corner and every face. I felt the old ache ignite in my chest, the longing for recognition and the bitter knowledge that I could never give it to them both, fighting inside me at once. I followed them quietly through the streets, keeping my distance, the rhythm of my footsteps matching the beat of my heart, the city alive around us, but I existed in my own bubble, a ghost watching the living search for someone they had forgotten 20 years ago. I wondered if they could feel my presence, if some instinct whispered to them that I was near, yet unattainable. Every gesture of theirs tugged at memories I had tried to bury, the way they held the folder, the hesitancy in their stride, the small pauses as if trying to summon courage from somewhere.
I remembered doing the same in their place 20 years ago, hoping against hope that I would find a mother who would never fail me. I realized then that life was cruel in its repetition. I thought about stepping forward, revealing myself, the thrill of recognition, the chance to see their eyes widen in shock and realization. But fear and wisdom rooted me in place. I had walked away once, and it had saved me. I had survived the pain of absence, and now to reach out could undo all I had been. The years had taught me patience, patience in survival, patience in letting the world search for a ghost. Night fell, and the city hummed with life. I returned home, the envelope still sitting on my desk, a silent testament to the past. I poured myself tea, watching the steam curl up toward the ceiling, the familiar ritual grounding me in the present, a reminder that I had chosen myself in my life, even when the world had abandoned me 20 years ago. The next morning, the sun rose soft and forgiving across the rooftops. I walked to the beach, letting the sand sift between my toes, the waves lapping gently at the shore, each crash a reminder of the passage of time and the lessons learned in silence. I imagined them walking here too, searching for me, unaware that I had been near all along and that the woman they sought had long ceased to exist. I thought about writing a note, leaving it for them, somewhere hidden in the library or in the park, but I realized that even that act would compromise my sanctuary, my careful life rebuilt from the fragments of heartbreak and endurance. I was no longer theirs to find, and the choice to remain unseen was my quiet power, my secret victory. Weeks passed, the library quiet and serene. I watched them return occasionally, searching records, their footsteps hesitant, their voices soft. I kept my distance, letting them search for something that could no longer be found. I felt no triumph in their confusion, only a quiet satisfaction knowing that I had survived their absence and built a life that owed them nothing. Then one evening, the rain fell soft and relentless, the streets glistening under streetlights. I walked past the park and saw them pause a moment longer than usual, their gaze scanning the benches, the paths, the corners where shadows fell. I felt my heart tighten yet again, the pull of memory and love mingling with the protective shield of survival I had erected over decades. I remembered every day I had spent alone, every birthday they had missed, every call unanswered, every gift that vanished. I felt the sting of those years rise like a tide and then recede, leaving only the hard shell of endurance that had kept me alive. The woman I was now could survive anything, even the ghost of longing that returned at night. That night, I wrote in my notebook feverishly, the ink flowing across pages like a river of memory and emotion. I recorded every encounter, every sensation, every flicker of recognition and absence. I chronicled the ache and the triumph, the sorrow and the freedom, and I realized that this notebook was more than paper. It was a record of my survival, a testament to the woman I had become. And as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the moonlight casting patterns across the room, I whispered to the dark that I had changed my name. I had left my past behind, and I would never come back, that the mother who had waited 20 years was dead, and the woman who remained was untouchable, unseen, free from the cruelty of being forgotten again. The wind rattled the window panes, and I felt a strange peace settle over me, the storm outside echoing the turbulence I had endured inside. The years of abandonment had hardened me, tempered me, refined me into someone who could endure silence and heartbreak and still emerge whole and alive. I understood finally that my absence was my strength and my power. And as sleep crept over me that night, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief for the life I had built, sorrow for the love I had lost.
But I knew that the choice to leave had been mine and mine alone. The years of waiting had ended, not with reunion, but with survival, and that survival was sweeter than any recognition could ever be. The mornings grew colder and the sunlight weaker, but I felt stronger. The years of absence had carved a hollow that only I could fill, and I had learned to fill it with quiet rituals and careful solitude. I walked the streets unnoticed, yet fully present, observing the world without needing it to notice me. I saw families laughing, children chasing pigeons, mothers calling out names, fathers lifting small hands into the air, and for a moment the ache returned, but it was tempered now with understanding that life moves forward, and those who abandon must live with their choices as I had learned to live with mine. I no longer wished for recognition, only for peace. One afternoon, I wandered into the library early, the shelves empty, the silence thick and comforting, and I noticed a small boy peering curiously at the stacks. He reminded me painfully of the child I had once held in my arms, 20 years ago, the one who had turned away, the one who had forgotten me. I felt my chest tighten, but I did not speak. I only watched. The envelope on my desk had become a symbol, a talisman of the past and the world that had once sought to erase me. I touched it gently, my fingers tracing the familiar handwriting. The thought crossed my mind to open it, to see what they had written, but I could not bring myself to do it. The risk of hope was too great after all these years. The lesson had been learned, the cost too high. I remembered every winter night waiting by the phone, its silence, louder than words. Every birthday I celebrated alone, every holiday I endured without their presence, each small act of absence engraving itself into my bones. I had waited 20 years for them to call, and they did not, and I had survived that pain, and now I would not undo it even for recognition. Then one evening I walked past the park and saw them again, older, taller, searching among the benches and the paths, their movements hesitant, uncertain. I felt a strange mixture of longing and satisfaction. The ache returned like a tide, but I had learned to ride it. I did not follow closely. I did not call out. I only watched the effort, the searching, the unanswered questions. The streets were wet with rain, the sky a pale gray, and the reflections in the puddles made the world feel unreal. I imagined myself in those reflections, the mother who had been forgotten, the woman who had vanished, the stranger who had survived, and I realized that I had become untouchable, not by cruelty, but by necessity, by the wisdom born from suffering. I had chosen life over reunion, and that choice had shaped me into someone stronger. Weeks passed, and the visits continued, always from a distance, always searching and never finding. I followed routines meticulously, walking early mornings, watching the sunrise, sipping tea, watching the world move without needing to be part of it. I had built a life around absence, a life that no one could penetrate, not even those who had caused the wounds. Then one evening, the envelope finally disappeared from the desk. It had been picked up, perhaps returned, or perhaps read. I felt a pang of curiosity, tempered with relief. I had survived enough to witness their search without being found. I realized finally that survival alone was the greatest justice, the quiet vengeance of living fully despite the abandonment. I went home that night, the city lights casting long shadows across the walls. I poured tea and stared out the window, the world alive and bustling outside, and I understood that my life had become a story written in absence, in endurance, in silent triumph. I had lived 20 years without them, and I was alive, whole, unbroken, untouchable. I remembered the nights of despair, the hollow phone calls, the unanswered letters, the gifts that vanished, the birthdays alone, the tears I had shed silently. And I realized that each moment had forged me into someone who could survive anything, someone who could bear absence and still find strength in solitude, someone who had learned that life could continue even when love had turned its back. Then one night, as the wind howled against the windows, I dreamed of them, the child I had lost, the grown person searching for a mother who would not return. I imagined what it would feel like to speak to them, to say my name, to hear theirs. I awoke trembling, knowing that I had survived long enough to choose silence over reunion, to be present yet untouchable, to witness without being witnessed. I walked the streets the following morning, the sky clear, the air crisp, the familiar scent of bread drifting from the bakery. I smiled softly at the people passing by, none aware of the story I carried, the invisible weight of decades of absence, the strength it had given me, the freedom it had forged. I felt a sense of peace, stronger than longing, stronger than regret. That evening I sat by the window, writing in my notebook, chronicling every step of my journey, every ache, every triumph, every decision that had led me to this moment. The ink flowed freely across pages, a testament to endurance, a record of survival, a silent witness to the woman who had waited 20 years and finally chosen herself. And as night fell, I lay awake, listening to the rain patter softly against the roof. I whispered to the dark that the mother who had waited was gone, and the woman who remained was untouchable, free, alive, and strong, that the years of absence had taught lessons no reunion could teach, that the only justice in some stories is to survive and protect oneself above all else. The wind rattled softly against the windows, the moonlight painting the walls in pale silver. I felt a strange satisfaction. The ache that had haunted me for decades had transformed into quiet power. I had endured the unthinkable and emerged unbroken. I had survived being forgotten and chosen life over despair. And that choice was mine, and mine alone. And as I drifted to sleep that night, I held tightly to the knowledge that my story was complete, in absence, in endurance, in quiet triumph. That no search, no letter, no recognition could undo the life I had built for myself. That the woman I had become was untouchable and free, and that was all the justice I would ever need.
I realized then that the power of absence is its own vengeance, the quiet knife that turns slowly and painlessly, the justice of survival, the satisfaction of witnessing without being seen, the life rebuilt, stronger, sharper, more untouchable, because you are no longer theirs, and they can search forever without finding the one who waited 20 years. I walked a few steps closer, but remained hidden behind a pillar, unseen. They paused a moment, looked around, their eyes scanning the crowd, searching for a mother who would not come. I could almost hear the silent questions in their heart, the ache of not knowing where she went, the desperate hope that she might appear. And I smiled softly to myself. The years of waiting had ended, not with reunion, but with quiet triumph. The sky shifted to gold and orange as the sun dipped low, the light catching the edges of their hair, their hesitant posture, their searching gaze. And I felt something strange, a mixture of sorrow and delight, that life had allowed me this one moment to witness their longing without them ever knowing I was near, to see that the years of absence had taught lessons no apology could undo. I thought of the envelope still sitting at the library desk, perhaps now opened, perhaps not. It did not matter. What mattered was that I had chosen myself over the heartbreak, the silence over the reunion, the life I had rebuilt over the one they had tried to erase. I was untouchable, invisible, alive, and free, and nothing could take that from me now. They walked past the fountain, their steps slowing as the shadows lengthened, uncertainty pulling at them like gravity. I stayed behind a column, breathing deeply, feeling the cool wind against my face. The years of abandonment had forged a strength I never knew I could possess, and now it was mine, entirely and completely, and they would never know it. For a moment, I imagined calling out my old name, watching them turn, eyes wide in shock, their lips trembling, but I shook my head. The temptation fierce yet fleeting, the wisdom stronger. I had waited 20 years for recognition, and it had never come. And in that absence, I had learned the ultimate lesson. The only revenge that mattered was survival. They continued walking, searching every corner, and I followed at a distance, careful not to reveal myself. The quiet satisfaction of being unseen, more intoxicating than any reunion, more powerful than any embrace. 20 years of longing could never teach them what absence could, and I felt the cold, sharp joy of poetic justice sinking deep into my bones. The sun vanished behind the buildings, leaving long shadows that stretched across the square. I paused for a moment, letting the darkness wash over me, and I realized the ultimate truth. The mother they were searching for no longer existed. The woman who had waited 20 years was gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, untouchable, free. And they would never find her. And that was the sweetest victory of all. Night fell fully and the city lights flickered on, casting golden halos over empty streets. I walked home, my steps quiet, my heart calm. The envelope no longer mattered, the search no longer mattered. The power of absence complete and perfect. I had survived every cruelty, every heartbreak, every silence, and emerged as someone no one could erase. I poured myself tea and watched the moon rise over the rooftops, the city alive below me, the wind whispering through the streets, a soft echo of all I had endured. I smiled softly, because the woman who had waited 20 years was dead and gone, and the woman who remained would never again be subject to the cruelty of being forgotten again. Then I opened my notebook and wrote the final words, the ink flowing thick across the page, a testament to survival and triumph, the chronicle of a life rebuilt from absence, the record of endurance and quiet vengeance, the story of a mother forgotten and the stranger she became, the one they could never find.
And as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the moonlight spilling across the room, I whispered to the darkness the truth that had taken decades to learn, the ultimate lesson of abandonment and survival. I had waited 20 years for them, and I had chosen myself instead. The mother they sought no longer existed, and I was free and untouchable, and that was the final word. I drifted into sleep, finally at peace, the years of absence a shield around my heart, the pain transformed into quiet power, the ache of longing tempered by survival and endurance, the poetic justice complete. They could search forever and never find the one who had waited, the one who had vanished, the mother they had chosen to forget. And I smiled softly because I had won in the only way that truly mattered.